Hi, my name is John Bowen, and I first came to Knox in, 1977, just after the end of the Ice Age. And Knox has been wonderful in supporting my ministry, first of all with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship for many years, and then teaching evangelism at Wycliffe College just down the road from Knox for 20 years. I'm now retired, which obviously makes Sam think that I have time to do things like this particular project. I should have foreseen when I signed up for it that towards the end of March you would be reading toward the end of Mark's Gospel, and that someone would have to deal with Mark chapter 13. And I guess I was the one who drew the short straw. Thanks a lot, Sam. Anyway, I have received 11 questions, 11. So I'm just going to give a brief answer to each one, which is the best I can do. And I'll try to be done in 15 minutes. So fasten your seatbelts and I will start my stopwatch now. Number 1, in verse 2, Jesus says, "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." And someone asks the question, there are still stones on one another in the Western Wall. Is this hyperbole? Well, this is the quickest answer of all. Yes, it is hyperbole. You'd probably like a little more. Charles Hodge, a famous 19th century theologian, said, "The Bible is a storehouse of facts." And I think that's our cultural bias, to take things, especially in the Bible, as simple statements of fact. Well, sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're literal, sometimes they're figures of speech. The trick, of course, I acknowledge, is knowing which is which. But here it seems to me it's pretty clear. Number 2. Someone asks, isn't it possible that Mark's Gospel was written after the destruction of the temple in AD 70, given what Jesus says in verse 2, "Not one stone will be here left upon another"? Or can we be certain Mark would have drawn the parallel explicitly? Well, yes, it is possible that Mark was written after the year 70, and that Mark is simply recalling that Jesus foretold this event. I don't have a problem with that. However, it seems more likely that Mark was written earlier than that. And there's a pretty straightforward argument for that. Number 1, Luke obviously drew on the Gospel of Mark when he was writing his own Gospel. Number 2, Luke also wrote Acts, which ends with Paul still alive. Number 3, Paul, we know, was put to death under the Emperor Nero in 67 AD. And therefore, number 4, Mark must have been written well before then, before 67 AD. Number 3, someone asks, how are these signs, wars, earthquakes, famines in verses 6 to 8 different from every day? Or are they not supposed to be? I take this to mean, is Jesus talking about specific wars, earthquakes, and famines just before the day of the Lord that are somehow different from the everyday wars, earthquakes, and famines that we are sadly so familiar with? I would like to have my cake and eat it, if I may. On the one hand, there may indeed be specific disasters before the return of Christ, or even before the fall of Jerusalem. But on the other hand, any time such things happen, they're always, in one sense, signs of the end. That is, they remind us of the uncertainty and fragility of life. And they should prompt us to pray for the Lord to intervene and sort things out. How long, O Lord? How long? Number 4. Verse 7 says, "Do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come." And so someone asks, how are we supposed not to be alarmed? It's a reasonable question. I can only say Jesus tells us at least half a dozen times in the Gospels, "Fear not. His power is greater than any evil the world can throw at us." So we trust in him. I know that's easy to say, and I find it as hard as anyone. but I still feel it is the only possible answer. Number 5. After listing the problems of the world, Jesus adds in verse 8, this is but the beginning of the birth pangs. Did you notice that? One person, reasonably enough, asks, what birthing is Jesus referring to? It's a good question. It seems to mean the birth of the new age, the world to come, the new heavens and the new earth. Jesus uses the same imagery of birthing in John 16, verses 20 to 21. Very truly, I tell you, you will have pain, but your pain will turn into a joy. When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a human being into the world. Paul also picks up this imagery in Romans 8, 23 to 24. We know that the whole creation has been, what? Groaning in labor pains until now. Isn't that an interesting image of the old world trying to give birth to the new? I'm not going to stop on it, but I suggest we need to reflect on that rather more. Question 6. In verse 13, Jesus says, the one who endures to the end will be saved. So, someone asks, what happens to the people who can't endure to the end? Fair enough. Well, of course, if you're a strict Calvinist, that's easy. You will quote to me the 5th point of Calvinism to do with the perseverance of the saints. The elect will endure as they are predestined to do. And if people don't endure, they were obviously not saved and were not among the elect in the first place. Next question. No, seriously though, it seems to me Jesus is saying just one thing here to his disciples. Don't give up, even when you feel like it. That's where his focus is, and therefore where ours should be. And that should prompt us to ask for strength to endure, not for fear of what might happen if we don't, but for the sake of the reward, the joy of seeing God face to face. In other words, we need to concentrate on the carrot and not worry too much about the stick. Question 7. In verse 23, Jesus says he's told them everything in advance. That's his phrase. And someone asks, what is that essential everything? Oh, fair enough. In the context, the everything in advance just means everything I've just told you about the coming disaster in Jerusalem. To summarize, times are going to get tough, but hang in and be ready. That's the essential everything. But in a sense, everything advance could equally refer to everything Jesus ever taught, right? Which enables us to live our lives for God and to prepare for Jesus' return. Question 8. One questioner asks about verse 30. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened, and says, this seems untrue. What does Jesus mean? People have disagreed over this passage for 2,000 years, so you're in good company. However, 4 of the commentaries I consulted agree that the reference is most likely to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, which is described in verses 5 to 23, and which many in that generation would live to see. But as you probably figured out, teaching about the fall of Jerusalem and teaching about the day of the Lord are interwoven in this chapter. And verses 24 to 26 are to take place after that suffering and will culminate with the Son of Man coming in the clouds, 26. But if those commentaries are right, verses 28 to 30 about this generation will see these things is actually taking us back to the earlier verses about Jerusalem. I agree, it's confusing, but I do think it's the most obvious and sensible solution. Then for question 9, there's one person who reflects theologically on this mystery of Jesus not knowing things, which is mentioned in verse 32. About that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. The question is, how do we understand the Trinity if the Father can know the time, but not the Son? Well, theologians distinguish between Christ as the eternal second person of the Trinity and Christ as the incarnate Son of God. Obviously, there's continuity between the two. We say he became human, or the Word became flesh. But there's also discontinuity. They're not the same thing. And if the incarnation is real and not a pretense, a mask that Jesus puts on, he has to be limited in the way that real people are. He can't be omnipotent. Remember when he wasn't able to do miracles in Nazareth? He's not able to be omnipresent. And so in the same way as a real, genuine human being, he's not omniscient. There are things the Father knows that the Son does not, as long as he's in his earthly form. Presumably, after the ascension, when he is restored to the Father's right hand, his omniscience is restored. Question 10. In verses 33 to 37, Jesus says, "Beware, keep alert, and keep awake." So someone asks, what does it look like to be on guard, to keep alert, and to watch for this day? Now, I have to say, I don't think he is saying, think about the second coming all the time. That would be unhealthy and counterproductive to living a Christian life. But I do think he is telling us to make sure we are aware of spiritual realities every day and to live our lives consistently in the light of them, even when we're not thinking explicitly about them. And there are various things we can do, of course, to keep check on ourselves that we're living in the light of spiritual realities, starting and ending the day with prayer, like giving thanks at meals, keeping a Bible verse where we can see it during the day, being faithful in attendance at Christian gatherings, choosing to do things that we would not do if we were not Christians. And I'm sure you can think of other examples of how we can be on guard and keep alert and watch for the day. And the final question, what are Jesus' priorities for concern? And I'll just say this. The story is told of St. Francis that he was once asked what he would do if he was told that Jesus would return the next day. He was the head of the Franciscans, of course, and therefore he was sweeping the floor of the monastery, servant leadership. He stopped and thought for a moment and then said, I would keep sweeping this floor. It's a good answer. What are Jesus' priorities for us? To do the work he puts in front of us, faithfully, prayerfully, and diligently. Nothing more, nothing less. 12 minutes, 15 seconds. Pretty good, eh? Thanks for listening.